This story is about Martin and Julia. They were happily married to each other and madly in love with each other. Martin and Julia had a deep love for the nomadic life, and they wanted to explore abandoned lands together. It was their own decision to move to a haunted house in an abandoned town in the USA. However, the locals warned them about the house, but they didn't stop. Martin wanted to experience this haunted house himself. They moved to this ghost town in the USA, and their archaic house was located nearby an ancient haunting tree. Their hut was also quite old. It had creaking wooden floors, antique furniture, and cracked walls. Martin was quite fond of old houses. He instantly fell in love with this house. Ever since they moved here, Julia was scared of this place. She could feel that she was not alone in this house, as some strange things were continuously happening with her, which were also becoming a regular part of her daily life. Julia was constantly hearing a stranger's footsteps outside her room, which also used to echo through the empty hallways at night. She was also seeing the objects strangely moving from one place to another. Not only this, she could feel the presence of an unknown person around her. Julia realized that someone was sharing their living space, and their target was Julia and Martin. Julia discussed her fears with Martin, but he didn't pay heed to Julia's fears. He was also unaware of any paranormal activity. Julia maintained silence after sharing her fears with her husband. One night, Julia was making coffee for Martin when she found an album in the kitchen's cupboard. It was an extremely old album that consisted of a family's photographs. The snaps were tucked away in blood, and captions of photographs revealed the details about a happy girl Emily's beautiful married life. Emily was the owner of this house, which was bought by her husband in 1906. Julia got scared, ran towards her room, and hugged Martin, who was asleep. She was now scared. It was evident that Emily was the unknown ghost of the house. On a beautiful Sunday night, Julia was sleeping in her bed while Martin was at work. In the middle of her sleep, Julia felt an overwhelming pressure on her shoulder. Someone grabbed her tightly. Her heart raced as she tried to move, but her body felt paralyzed and she couldn't see who was holding her. The sleepiness in her eyes made it hard to comprehend the situation. Julia started calling Martin. She was in panic. She was shouting with full force, but her voice was going down. "Martin, Martin, please help me." Slowly, the pressure on her shoulder eased. She opened her eyes, and she could now move. Emily was staring at Julia with her evil eyes. She wanted to snatch Julia and Martin's happiness because they occupied her house. Julia once again fell unconscious. "Who are you and what do you want?" Julia asked. "I am Emily. I will rule this place forever." Julia was scared. She woke up, but the unknown voice she heard was now silenced. It was still dark and scary. Julia madly ran towards Martin, who was doing the woodworking outside the house in his open-air workshop. Julia got scared as she realized that she hadn't heard the voice of Martin's woodcutter for a long time and that he was not around. She ran into the jungle, which was outside their hut. Julia searched outside but couldn't find Martin. His half-ready craft was there, but Martin was absent. Julia then saw a crowd of people. She came closer to the crowd, and people were gathered under a tree. She slowly reached toward them. They were standing near a dead body. Julia was in shock. It was the dead body of Martin. A few locals reported in conversation that Martin died 2 hours ago. Julia could not believe it. Her world shattered into a million pieces as she knelt by her husband's lifeless body. She was in disbelief, grief, and despair. Her loving husband left her. Her happiness was snatched by someone. She couldn't believe it. Martin became another victim of this haunted place. Julia was lost and broken. Her heart ached. It was not a dream, but a dreadful reality that she lost her husband in a blink. Their dreams died down. Julia was left alone. The locals were still discussing Julia and Martin. They were feeling pity for them. "I think he chose the wrong place for him. This place belongs to a ruthless ghost," said an old man. Julia sat next to Martin's dead body when a voice occurred in her ears with a soft blow of wind. "Finally, I won." Julia then buried Martin with the help of her neighbors. She was standing at Martin's grave. After spending time at Martin's grave, Julia decided to leave the haunted house. She picked up her important luggage and left the house forever. Emily was watching her leave the house. She smiled at her and went inside saying, "I won." Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of my channel, Glimpse of Horror. This story is about a married woman named Linda, who was fond of thrifting and would often go to vintage shops to buy herself some antique items. Whenever she found an old and antique item, she would be over the moon, as if she had found all the world's treasures. One day, after dropping her kids off at school, she decided to buy furniture and wall hangings for her new home. She had been planning to fill her new house with unique and classic pieces. Her friend Abigail had told her about a new shop in the neighborhood that was selling household items and furniture for a lower price. When Linda reached the shop, she was surprised to see that it was a rather tiny shop. She looked around but did not find anything exquisite. While she was going to get out of the shop, something golden caught her attention. In a pile of frames, she saw a gold frame peeking out. She bent down and started looking through the frames. The gold frame was a mirror. Its frame was rusted in some places, but anyone can tell that it was a rather antique piece. Linda immediately bought it and took it with her. On the way back to her home, she also got some cleaning products to make the mirror brand new. As soon as she reached home, she took out all her supplies and started clearing the mirror. She polished the frame and cleaned the mirror. Within minutes, it was as good as new. Linda placed it on the wall of her living room. Later in the evening, when all her family members were having dinner, they loved the new mirror. Linda found herself especially obsessed with the mirror. She felt that the mirror was always calling her, so she kept on looking at her reflection in the living room mirror. Her husband found it strange that Linda would not look at herself in their room dressing mirror, but rather she would keep on going to the living room. One day, her husband found her awake in the middle of the night. Linda was dressed in a red gown and wore heavy makeup. She was looking at herself in the mirror and talking to her reflection. Her husband immediately held her and asked what she was doing, but Linda fainted right away in her arms. Her husband saw that in the mirror, Linda's reflection looked different and had a dark aura around it, but he did not give much thought to it. The next day, the same thing happened to Linda. She woke up and started to get dressed in front of the mirror. She even placed the mirror in her bathroom and removed the toilet mirror. Now she would spend hours in front of it, doing her makeup and putting on different outfits. Linda used to talk to herself and make plans, but now she has started talking to her reflection in the mirror, and the reflection speaks back to her. It would tell Linda what she should be doing and how she should be living her life. The reflection started to tell her that she was a chosen one, and now, with the help of the mirror, she would achieve everything. Linda used to complain a lot about her co-worker who would boss around her, and now that she has told all about it to the reflection, who told her to secretly poison his morning coffee, the mirror even told her where she could find such a poison that could never be detected and that the death would seem natural. And so, Linda did exactly that. The following day, when she went to the office, everyone was crying and talking about the employee who had passed away the night before. Linda was glad that she got rid of her coworker, but the same day she got a call from her kid's school that her daughter was pushed by another kid and broke her nose. Linda took her to the hospital, but she was furious about the other kid even after her mother apologized and promised to cover the hospital bills. Linda was full of rage, and as soon as she went back home, she told all about it to the mirror. Her reflection told her that she needed to get rid of both the kid and her mother for hurting her child. The reflection told Linda that she needed to put the house on fire. The next day, Linda went to the school, sneaked into the records, and found out the kid's address. She found out that it was close to her own house, so she managed to jump into the house through a window. Since no one was home, it was easy for her to roam freely. Linda went straight into the kitchen and turned on the stove gas. She hurried out of the house and went home. Later that evening, when ambulance sirens could be heard in her neighborhood, they found out that an entire family was burned as the house caught fire after the stove was left open. A sinister smile appeared on Linda's face, and her husband saw that. That night, her husband confronted her about the fire and said that everyone near Linda has been dying, and she was complaining about the kid and her mother yesterday. So what was going on? Linda got furious and told her husband that he was acting hysterical and accusing her of crimes she never committed. He fought her about the mirror and told her to get rid of it because she's been acting strange ever since she brought it into the house. Linda felt some guilt but said nothing, and as she was going to remove the mirror, she accidentally dropped it, and a black smoke released from it and spread in the house. Linda felt a sense of relief when the mirror broke, and she threw the broken pieces in the garbage. Days later, when everything was back to normal, one day when Linda woke up to take her kids to school, she saw a dead cat on her daughter's bed. Its head was sliced off, and her daughter was holding a knife with a sinister smile on her face.